On this week's episode of Poll Hub, Caucus Confusion. Days after the Iowa caucuses, well, a winner still hasn't been declared. What happened in the Hawkeye State? We do our best to offer some clarity along with Patrick Murray, director of the Monmouth University Polling Institute. Plus, the gold standard of Iowa polling. It was scrapped right before release, leaving journalists and pollsters alike very perplexed. And the Marist Poll is going to New Hampshire. We have the perspective of one student traveler. This is Poll Hub, so let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Barbara Carvalho, director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Merengoff, director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Mary Griffith, media director for the Marist College Poll.
And where's Jaded Upper? He's far
way far, far away.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He's vacationing, globetrotting.
Well, so we started into Iowa, the Iowa caucus. We had multiple candidates, and we had
multiple counts,
multiple results. And now that Iowa is sort of done, we still have multiple candidates, and we still have multiple results. And I think the only time Iowa had real clarity was when Cruz won in the caucus. And every time we seem to have this kind of like, review the results. Let's go to the videotape. Let's check the count.
Well, first of all, I think transparency is really hard because it's in Iowa in particular, because the caucus is not simple, and we've talked about this over multiple podcasts, that we might have ended up with very different counts. Counts in an entrance poll, counts once the caucus goers realign during a particular caucus, and then the delegate count. So it was already kind of set up for not having a lot of clarity. But I think trying to adjust to a media schedule and to be really transparent about it, I think the Iowa really had a big problem this time.
Well, on that note, Patrick Murray, who's the director of the Monmouth University Polling Institute, a friend of ours and colleague for many, many polling cycles, I guess we would say.
That old.
No. Well, we've been. You get a lot of scars in this business, and the white hair and all that. So, Patrick, thank you for joining us.
So this is in pollster years.
Yes.
Yes.
We're counting in pollster years.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Lee, Barbara, Mary. Good to see you.
Okay, so let's start with the actual results, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Des Moines Register poll, and I guess we just had trouble getting results anywhere out of Iowa. So what was your perspective of Monday night as you were watching this dribble in or not?
Yeah, it was fascinating because I was actually watching the exit poll numbers come in.
Okay, entrance poll.
Entrance poll numbers come in early. It looks like the entrance poll was a pretty good poll. On the day. But it was just funny as we were hearing this, and I was sort of prepared for this because it was just an unusual thing for the Democratic Party to do. Is they were really trying to have it both ways. A caucus is about establishing your party platform, selecting your local delegates that are going to go to the county convention, and then on and on. It's not about establishing the broad base of the party's presidential preferences, which is a primary. Mm-hmm. So they tried to do both a primary and a caucus in one thing and in one event, and I think that's where we saw the failing come apart.
So I think we're seeing this is not the first time they've had that problem.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting is right. They've only reported out the state delegate equivalents before, and it looks like they probably had big errors in those in the past too.
Yeah.
In terms of their precinct chairs actually following the rules correctly. They're just revealing that now in this.
It seems also, if I kind of think back to other previous caucus nights, and it's not just the Democrats that have kind of gotten quagmired in Iowa, but it has been the Republicans as well. We've come out with different winners on the Republican side. Can you talk a little bit about the history? Yeah, the
exactly.
history of the caucus in that sense.
Right. Well, I mean, we all know the history of the caucuses, right? It goes back to, it was exactly how I described. Party platform, select your local delegates. They go to the county convention. The county convention selects the state delegates who select the national delegates. And nobody paid much attention to this before Jimmy Carter in 1976, who thought, hey, this is a good way to get my name. I'm unknown as the governor of Georgia. How about if I actually campaign in these caucuses and establish my mark that way? And then suddenly everybody was flocking to these caucuses, but they were never designed to be a broad-based preference vote on either side, Democrat or Republican. And you just made reference to 2012 when there were errors in the final counting, and it turned out that Rick Santorum had actually edged out Mitt Romney in the caucuses. But by the time we found that out, it was already well down the road, and the impact of the caucuses, which is not about delegates, we're only talking about 1% of the total pledged delegates to the National Convention come out of Iowa. It's not about the delegates, it's about the momentum that a quote-unquote media win in Iowa gives you.
And I'm just curious about that impact, because it's very possible that we won't actually know the results of the Iowa caucuses before we actually get into the final phases of the campaign in New Hampshire. So what do you think? What will be the impact in terms of momentum as we head into the first of the nation primary?
Yeah, I just released a poll in New Hampshire, and we did it. We started it on the night of the Iowa caucuses, did a few interviews that night, but did most of them on the following days, with the thinking of we'd have a clear understanding of who won Iowa, and we'd be able to measure that impact.
The bounce, the bounce.
Didn't
We
happen.
know that
but
we
what
know the feeling well.
right? So what we're looking at in our data is, okay, there's a potential for a bounce if people can figure out what happened in Iowa. The bounce being, Sanders is strong and remains strong, and he has his core base of support. But for Buttigieg in particular, that we found a number of voters. Most voters said that the Iowa caucuses didn't affect them at all because they don't know what the results are. But if it turns out that Buttigieg is the winner or somehow declared a winner as we get into this weekend, is that can then turn into a bounce at the very last minute for him. But it's enabling some others like Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar to soldier on because it's not clear how they performed or whether they underperformed or overperformed in Iowa.
Yeah. Now, I know Barb wants to talk about the whole media role in all this. I want to know, looking down the road in future election cycles, is there going to be an opportunity to make the Iowa caucus great again, or is this going to be the death blow, do you think?
I think, and quite frankly, I'll be normative here and say I hope it's the death blow of the Iowa caucus as a presidential preference caucus, because, as I mentioned, you can't have both a presidential primary and a caucus in the same type of event.
Yeah.
And you hear from Iowans who say, well, we're really engaged here. Guess what? More than 2/3 of the eligible voters in Iowa didn't show up in this caucus.
And
so how engaged does that mean you are?
Yeah, and as it turns out, turnout was not as expected and was lower than 4 years ago. How much? I mentioned before that transparency is really hard, and as public pollsters, we know that probably better than most people.
Right.
That to be transparent about everything that you do. And to have everything scrutinized and assessed, and everybody evaluating, how you're going about things, is really tough. So how much do you think the media spotlight really burned, the folks in Iowa, and perhaps even as we segue into discussion about the poll, how much it impacted, what was, appeared to be, a tough night for the Des Moines Register poll as well.
Right. Yeah, I think a couple things. The media's desire or need to call a winner, and in this case, we had 5 candidates who performed relatively similarly, regardless of what the final numbers are. That's what it's going to be. A couple did a little better in a low turnout election in one very small state. Should be the way that the media characterizes the results, but they don't. They can't. They have to characterize it a big win, a big momentum, and so hundreds of millions of dollars are spent in Iowa to do that. And I think the media is the driver of that, and the need to declare a winner, even if it's a winner by, 27.5% to 27.2%, which tells you that there's no real leader in this race, and that was problematic. And I think that plays out in terms of the poll. And I feel really bad for Ann Seltzer, for 2 things. We're talking about transparency. The Des Moines Register poll isn't as transparent as you or I are, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
They don't release their demographics. They don't tell you exactly how they're weighted. You don't get that understanding so that you can judge exactly what's going on. And so what happens if I come out with different numbers than the Des Moines Register poll comes out with? You see pieces in the upshot of comparing the two, but they can only actually analyze my data and take a guess at their data. And so it's really an unfair comparison because you can't do the same thing on the other side. Now, what I've found out from talking to Ann Seltzer is that this is not her decision, this is the Des Moines Register's decision. And I talked to CNN about that too, because CNN is transparent and they will share their own data when they do their national polls with SSRS. But they don't do it because with the Iowa poll, because of the Des Moines Register rules about we're not releasing any of this other stuff. They're not transparent. So they end up living and dying by that, and that's problematic. Then the other thing is, if you kind of like reify this poll into this mystical being that actually is itself the results, and you schedule a Pollapalooza TV show around it at 9 o'clock on Saturday night, and you run into what you and I probably we all think is probably a very fixable problem that they encountered, but it would have taken just a few more hours or maybe another night to do it. But you're tied to this. Suddenly, those networks throw the pollster under the bus, which is, I think, what happened with Ann Seltzer.
Yeah, I want to also
say,
just,
oh, this is horrible.
I want, and as they say there, but for the grace of God, go I. And obviously, we all feel that this would have been an uncomfortable position to be in. But as you say, there were things that could be addressed. I just want to point out one other thing, though, that we did ask Ann to come on this podcast because we did want to, and she was tied up with other things, I guess, but didn't want to do this. So we did, and it hasn't made a lot
at
of
the time. She really wasn't doing interviews.
Yeah, but
and that surprised me.
Yeah,
because
I think it has to do with that her contract with the Des Moines Register. So she has a contract like I do independently. You do with media partners, but
Sure.
as part of your media partner, your agreement with them, as I understand it, is that you can talk about your poll.
Yeah, it's very hard
Not
for
only
me
can
not
we-
to talk. It's
not,
very hard
not
for
only,
me.
I mean, not only can we talk about the poll, but part of our agreement is that we need to adhere to, our professional association, APOR, the Transparency Initiative, and also if we are to do a poll, we will release the numbers regardless of what the results show, and that's part of our agreement. I'm not saying that if we find something that is an egregious error, that we would somehow still release the results. We would do our due diligence to make sure that the results were accurate. But regardless of what the results show, that poll is going out in a public way. So that's part of the agreement that we have with NBC News, and they have always been completely comfortable with that arrangement and very supportive of it. So in a sense, the Des Moines Register lack of transparency just seems very last century. I guess when they started this decades ago, you could kind of get away with that sort of thing, but we are well past that.
Yes, for sure.
And I'm just wanted to point out that there are some safeguards that could be put in place in terms of the polling process. And so why don't we talk a little bit about that? What kinds of mechanisms in terms of the process could be out there that could prevent this from happening in the future?
Yeah, Patrick, we saw some of your tweets, and you had quite a very interesting list.
Yes, I mean, well, one of the things that I was looking at is, well, how did this happen? And it was funny because I happened to be in our field house on Monday night as we were wrapping up our Iowa poll, and encountered an interviewer who did not read the entire list. The supervisor had already caught it too, who was sitting in the monitoring room. And by the time I got to the monitoring room, had already zapped that interview and was about to pull that interview off for retraining. That was a retraining thing. But things that you do is if you use a browser-based system where it comes up on a browser, I don't know whether you do that, we do. Somebody can go in there and adjust the browser, but you can go in there and you can lock it. You should also have supervisors who go around and check those things.
Exactly.
But even if something like that happens, it's very simple to figure out, okay, who did these interviews, which terminal was it done on, and you can track down all those interviews and either go back, re-verify them, or go back and replace them.
Yeah,
It's
and
not a hard.
We,
it
we
wasn't a
also,
hard thing
I
to
mean,
do.
we also do recording of each interview, so we would be able to listen and actually, identify if a list was not read properly or
Right.
correctly. So it did leave a lot of speculation, and for those who like conspiracy theories, they were rampant. They had a really great
I know.
night on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to bait the hook with that, Patrick. It's always great to have to talk with you either in person or through the podcast. I understand you have a podcast as well, and I thought you might talk a little bit just quickly about that, and then we'll maybe catch you down the road somewhere in this campaign.
Yes. Thanks. Yes. So, on the side, when I'm not talking about polling and numbers and what's going on, one of the reasons why I got into polling was not to do elections, and I think you and I probably share
Sure.
this. It was to really understand what drives the American public in their thinking. And more recently, I've been thinking more and more about faith in the American system. That whole idea of what Ben Franklin said, this is a republic if you can keep it, and what the importance of public faith in institutions is. So my podcast is talking about that in the context of impeachment. I do it with a friend of mine who's an actor who actually played George Washington on Turn, Washington Spies. Ian
Oh,
Kahn.
cool.
So we talk about so we actually talk about it from the perspective of thinking about what an everyday citizen today would do versus back then. So it's called Guardians of the Republic. You can find it on any of your podcast app. It's very different from what you and I are talking about today and what I normally talk about when I go on the media about these polling numbers. It gives me an outlet to talk about those big picture things that ended up what really drove me into polling and public opinion to begin with.
And certainly faith in institutions is a hot topic these days. Patrick Murray from the Monmouth Polling Institute, thank you very much for joining us today on our podcast.
Hey, my pleasure.
So moving into New Hampshire, this weekend we are actually going to take our quadrennial student New Hampshire trip, and we're going to tour the state with about just more than 24 students. And joining us to talk about it is Megan Landgraf from Marist College. She's the class of 20 and Marist Poll newsfeed media assistant. Thanks, Megan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Barb.
And he left out, and New Hampshire's own Megan. 'Cause
That's true.
She's just going to the Granite State. She knows it well.
Well,
do.
welcome to Poll Hub, and you are going to get the opportunity to welcome us all to your home state in just a few hours' time.
This is true.
We are counting down the times
Are
to
you-
the trip.
Are you going to be driving the bus?
I am not going to be driving the bus, but I am very excited to get to go home with my friends and fellow students.
Now, this is not an inexpensive venture. Now, most of this trip has been paid for by a very generous Marist College alum and former Marist pollster. But you guys still had to put down quite a chunk of change to go on this adventure. What attracted you, besides the fact that you had a quick ride home?
Okay. Well, my first New Hampshire primary experience was about 2016, and that was very small scale. So when I started working here my sophomore year of college, Lee brought up the New Hampshire trip, and ever since then I've been considering going and applying for the trip. So I've been looking forward to it for a few years and to get to experience the primary on a larger scale.
What do you expect? You are a New Hampshire. You're a New Hampshire native.
I want to point out though that Megan lives north of Hanover, about 25 minutes north of Hanover. Do the candidates ever get up to your home area?
They do. They are frequently visiting Dartmouth, actually.
okay.
And then I actually got the opportunity to meet Marco Rubio in 2015. He was buddies with someone in my town, so he gave a little stump speech outside our local auto body shop.
Okay.
So I have had a few experiences.
and the town is, let's get it all on the record.
It's Orford, New Hampshire, and we have a population of 1,000, which Lee likes to make fun of me for, but
When you're at Marist, is it 999?
it could be.
Wasn't that?
What do you think, though, is going to be different in this trip? I mean, the state. You've heard and seen the primary come through before, but what are you expecting to be different?
I think the nature of this primary is a little bit different from last time, especially with the Democrats and Trump. And then I think after the Iowa caucus mishap, I think it'll be a really interesting race here in New Hampshire because it's basically just starting fresh for who the winner would be.
Is there any Democratic candidate that you are particularly interested in seeing campaigning? Because what I might just explain what we do on this trip is we meet with reporters, we meet with other politicians, we also go to a variety of campaign events. We try to get to see all of the candidates that are running, including the president and the vice president, who I believe
is going to be there on Monday. And we also are going to be sitting in on 2 of the Sunday morning talk shows. With one with Chris Wells, the other with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. So we're going to get a whole well-rounded indoctrination into New Hampshire, all things New Hampshire.
And Megan, you work with us here
I do,
on the news feed, your media assistant. And so you have different types of, expertise and skills that you've been able to garner, here at the Marist Poll. What types of things will you be doing in New Hampshire with us? And, how has this experience played into your overall academic experience here at Marist?
Sure. So something that I have a few responsibilities in New Hampshire above the rest that...
There's no such thing as a free trip, right?
This is true. This is pretty educational, but I get to take it one step further. So as a newsfeed media assistant, I will be a photographer on this trip, and I will also be a social media manager. So I'll be curating the Twitter and Facebook feed, maybe producing tweets, and then checking out my students' other feeds and see if anything is shareable.
Just like, all undergraduate education, she's actually going to have to pay us to have this great experience. But I didn't want to let you get away with answering the question about was there anybody that you are particularly interested in seeing?
I mean, definitely the candidate that I have already voted for because I filled out my absentee ballot. But I think any opportunity to see any candidate is really fascinating because you never know what'll happen. I think possibly seeing Biden is always a great opportunity just to see the former vice president in action, and then maybe the chance to see our current president. I don't know. I'm really looking forward to getting any exposure.
It's just something that New Hampshire residents, I've only been in New Hampshire once every 4 years since 1988, so I have a very odd view of what New Hampshire's like. It's something the New Hampshire residents say, "Oh boy, it's primary time. They're all coming here again." Oh my gosh! Or is it something that is loved or dreaded by the folks up there?
I think it's a pretty steady mix of both. Selfishly, we get the opportunity to see candidates far more than any other state, and for no really good reason in particular, because our delegate count is so small.
That's okay. You're first.
Yes. So selfishly,
Secretary of State,
we like that opportunity.
It's not going to change.
Yeah, we get a lot of media coverage, and then on the other hand, it gets pretty negative. The ads come out very early, so the campaign lasts a lot longer than anyone wants it to. Sure. And there's the road sign wars going on, and there's canvassers, people knocking on your door all the time. So it's kind of a headache for some, and some people really like the opportunity to see their candidate.
I just wonder if some of the people we poll,
the calls too. That's another thing.
I got Patrick Murray on the line. Let's talk to the Marist Poll for a second.
Well, but you know something? I think one of the things that I've found this week is we've also been doing polling of New Hampshire prior to the primary, is that our response rates from New Hampshire residents has been really, really great.
Yeah.
And they have, I don't know if they're just kind of at the beginning of the season and by November they're not going to want to be taking our calls, but right now people have been very eager to speak with our interviewers and to share their opinions about the political process.
And when we do see all this in action up close, I mean, they are an impressive group of residents. They are up on the issues. They're up on the candidates. This is it's very impressive. Okay, so let's get to the chase here. The time is coming soon when you're going to leave us after 4 years.
Yes.
That if we decide to let you go, you are
Right.
one of our main stars at the Marist Poll and have been for the duration of your college years. What down the road is Megan got in mind?
Well, since working here and my kind of interest in politics has led me to kind of settle with political communications and campaigns. That's kind of what got me in the first New Hampshire primary. It was very exciting to me. So I'm looking for internships and job opportunities in that kind of field. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, Megan, I can say that it has been truly a pleasure not just to have you on the podcast, but to work with you here in the office. You are one of our stars, and I might be a little biased because I get to see you in the office 2 or 3 times a week. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in New Hampshire, and thank you for joining us again today.
Thanks, Mary.
So that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. I, Mary Griffith, am the executive producer, and Casey Schaff is our editor.
And we want to thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell, as we do each time, for providing us all kinds of numbers so we know what's gone on in the past, so we better understand what's going on right now. And we want to thank our guests, Patrick Murray and Megan Landgraf. Thank
Close
God.
enough.
I'm so bad with last names.
Well, and if you have some questions or comments, I know many of you do because we do see you reach out to us on social media, but there we are on Marist Poll, at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And now you know Megan will actually be taking a look and waiting, so please make your comments and she will forward them to us. And if you want to learn more about polling and the things that we talk about each week, check out our online learning platform, the Marist Poll Academy. It's visual, engaging, and it is free. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. That's how people find us. So while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe.